How are you supposed to hold it? How many hands do I have?
What do you mean by that?
I'm as old as the DualShock. Oh. Generic intro into that Greensboro here, back with another video. Today we're doing my very first Scott the Woz video with the game controllers. A lot of these game controllers are going to be controllers that I've never used, never played with, some of them probably never even heard of. I said that I was going to react to Scott the Woz this year on top of everything else that I'm going on right now with Internet Historian, Maxer, Russian Badger, Dragon Ball Z Bridge with Kirby, episode 59 should be the next video that goes live. That should be right down there where it's the next video. That'll be episode 59. We just recorded that video like literally an hour ago. It's so good. But this is Game Controllers by Scott the Woz. Probably a similar kind of pattern to like old JonTron videos where he would talk about video games. There's an entire playlist on my channel dedicated to JonTron videos. You can check it out. I'll leave it right up there. I won't link that down below in the description because playlists have really long links. But this is finally Scott the Woz. There's a whole lot of stuff going on the channel right now as we push towards 100,000 subscribers. This has been requested for so long. It feels like it's been requested for years now. I do read every single one of your comments, so leave some down below. Patrons get the videos there early. And a lot of time about paywall on the channel. $3 a month gets you all my reaction videos there early. I do this all myself. I do all the recording, all the editing, every single thumbnail, and I read every single comment. And it's absolutely insane. I also stream 4 times a week, and I do this all myself. There's no team, there's no editor. It's just me doing all this, and I do respond to a lot of comments, so you know I'm actually reading them. But I'm super excited for this. Let's go ahead and jump into game controllers. All right.
Hey y'all!
How many of these have I never used?
And I can't wait to finally
What's
head
the
to this game
Pepto-Bismol?
controller issues meeting I just found out about.
Control issues. Oh,
my
yeah, no,
hands are
they
doing
meant something
this.
else.
And it wouldn't be
Never
possible without
used a
the
Wii U.
overlooked messiah of all video games, the controller. The pathway between
I've used
you
that
and
one.
the world within the screen. A game controller needs to house all the necessary input methods for games.
Oh, don't have an Elite controller.
While also
Or
being
do I?
incredibly transparent. It's best when it just melts into your hands and you don't have to think about where the B button is. It's just all second nature.
Never
However,
seen
the
that
road
one
to where we
before.
are now has been a rocky one. We've gone from to even.
Oof.
And that road started way early on. Video games need to be controllable to be considered games.
Playable, yeah.
So even back in the early days of scientists pissing around and making games on supercomputers instead of curing diseases, they
Yeah,
had to create
you know.
ways to play the games, like with the tried and true knob and button combo used for Tennis for Two in 1958.
Tennis for
when arcade
Two,
machines
Pong?
hit the scene, developers had to design the controls for each of their games, and thus their imagination wasn't compromised by
controls.
limiting control methods. They could create whatever control method would suit their game best.
I think it just clipped
Joysticks,
through.
trackballs, knobs, buttons, steering wheels. Each arcade
Steering
machine
wheels.
was different from the last.
I've
in
played
terms of
an arcade
controls.
machine with
so
steering
when home
wheels.
video game consoles were in development,
That game
there
exactly.
was definitely a hurdle to overcome. Developers
I did it
used
at
to having
Boxcar.
free range with how to control their games in the arcade. How do you create a controller that can be a jack of all trades, one that can work with all, or at the very least, a lot of the games released at the time?
Oh, that's hitting that one
Atari
is
said,
brutal.
F it and gave us a button and a stick. The Atari 2600
Whatever that
was the
does.
first major success in terms of home video
77.
game consoles with interchangeable
20 years before I was
cartridges.
born.
The first video game console ever, 1972's Magnavox Odyssey. did have a
Magnavox,
controller, all
wow.
right. The Fairchild Channel F predated the 2600 by a year, releasing in 1976, and has you holding a Snickers bar to control games. But the Atari 2600's joystick is definitely what the general public sees as the first video game controller, and definitely one of the most iconic. While its simplicity made many games harder to convert to the system, it's undeniable it played a key role in its success. No
I
matter
guess it
who
was
you
easier
are,
to
you
use.
look at this thing and say, yeah, that makes sense. How can you possibly screw this up? It's a giant red button and a rod. Anybody who's anybody knows what that's about. When you look back at video game successes in the early days, it's apparent that success came with controls that were easy enough for the general
Also,
consumer to understand.
oh, yikes.
And the 2600 controller was just that. Nevertheless, this thing is just a no-go nowadays.
Yeah,
this
no.
stick needs to go see a doctor. It's just too stiff.
Is
And the
it-
overall
is it
size
always
of the
like that?
controller is a problem for me
Small?
at least. It's too small to comfortably hold the joystick with one hand and the rest of the controller with the other, and it's too big to comfortably hold it like a modern controller.
Maybe you're supposed to sit on the
Overall, though,
ground?
I'd say the 2600 controller was alright for what it was. It's completely usable by anybody, just nothing you jump at the chance to use. After the 2600, controllers went through this ugly phase for a while.
Of
It was all
what?
because a controller designer went home for the weekend, looked at his phone and said, "I'm drunk."
Oh, that's a phone.
Yeah, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, even Atari themselves with the Atari 5200 all followed
Still got the knob.
trend of putting a number pad on the controller. Let me ask you
Why?
this.
Why do you
What
want a
dimension
number
do
pad?
Games this simple need more than 9 buttons.
Give me a
Many
keyboard
games
instead
came
of a
with
number
overlays
pad.
to put on the controller so you know what each button does, but that
That's
just kinda
cool.
forces you to constantly look at the controller to know what to press with or
Yeah.
without the overlays. In my opinion, that's
Yeah.
when a controller fails, when you have to look away from the game to figure out what the hell you're supposed to press. Well, after
That's
all
a
that
very
flop,
fair
we
point.
then make our way to the Nintendo
What, Duck
Entertainment
Hunt?
System, a true innovation for controllers, breaking
Toys
away from
R
the
Us.
joystick to form
Also, never
something
played
that was
Zelda
more
before.
compact and easier to hold. The Vectrex
plan
in
on streaming it.
1982 had a similar form factor for its controller, but the NES introduced something huge. Now I know, first thing many
that
people
thing.
probably said when they saw this cross on the controller was pump the brake speed
A
racer.
D-pad?
Nobody puts religion in my
Why
dick,
is it
though.
called a
But
D-pad?
this cross design called the D-pad made the controller way more comfortable to use with just your thumb. Nintendo used the D-pad beforehand on
Whoa.
one of their Game & Watch
That's an
handhelds,
early
and
DS.
precursors to it appeared elsewhere, but the NES shot the D-pad into the mainstream.
Also, I should be streaming
And with
Genshin
that,
Impact today.
the
I'm a new
joystick
player
was
at
old
5 p.m.
news.
on
Many
Twitch.
consider this guy to have aged poorly, and while I do somewhat agree, I think it's still alright to use. My main problem is the D-pad itself is a bit uncomfortable after long play sessions, but I love the
It's
feel
literally
of the
just a
buttons.
brick.
So clicky and satisfying to just go to town on. This is where the term button mashing was born.
Really?
I see a lot of people say the sharp corners really dig into their hands, but I've never personally had an issue with them. However, the sharpness was criticized
plastic.
even back in the day, so Nintendo responded with some alternatives. The NES Advantage
That-
is the
and they-
controller you never let your daughter
you
go
know,
to prom
cut the
with.
edge.
This thing is a hulking beast that's powered by 2 whole controller ports.
That's
You can
crazy.
flip a switch to alternate between player 1 and 2 for games
That's
like
pretty
Super
cool.
Mario Brothers, where you alternate turns. There's turbo buttons
Oh.
with knobs which allow you to have rapid fire on A and B, and don't forget the state-of-the-art slow motion feature, which was
Oof.
just simply the game constantly pausing and unpausing itself. That
That
meant for games
can't
that
be
featured
good.
anything on the screen when paused, they just looked
Did
off.
that
Regardless, the
because
NES
of-
Advantage
was
is
that
a
how the
beaut of a
the
controller. I think
monitors
this
work?
thing is
The
really
TVs?
slick. It just feels so sturdy, and there's something so satisfying about
I
pressing
have
these huge
never seen that
buttons.
one before.
But what if you're not into overcompensating? Well, the NES Max may be for
Whoa,
you, featuring a new
that's
grippable
starting to look
design
like an
with
actual
turbo buttons
controller.
of the Advantage alongside something called the Cycloid, a bit of a precursor to the 3DS Circle Pad. It's much easier
Never
to grip
used
thanks to
3DS.
these new thighs, but the Cycloid really isn't a replacement for the D-pad in my opinion. Now, with the introduction of the NES top
Looks like a
loader,
vacuum
Nintendo
cleaner
redesigned the standard
attachment.
NES controller, nicknamed the Dogbone. This thing was so close to being the perfect NES controller.
What's wrong with
the
it?
rounded edges, the nicer feeling D-pad, but they just had to angle the A and B buttons so only a lobster could hold
Oh.
it correctly. It just doesn't feel right. Nobody's hand normally rests like this on a controller. It's
That's
just
fair.
uncomfortable. Well, since the original
made them
NES
do that?
controller worked, many simply tried to copy it. The Sega Master System and TurboGrafx 16 controllers, while different,
And
in
they
some
rounded
ways,
the edges.
were basically just their version of the NES controller.
I'm still not born
Atari
yet.
decided to barge into the party with their 7800 controller, and I'm pretty sure
Looks like it
everybody
belongs
stared
in a,
at them until they released
like,
this instead.
mechanic's
Only in
toolbox.
Europe, though. In the US, we retreated to this, and over there they got this. Look
Huh.
at them. Of course, Sega
Yeah.
had to do something different with the Sega Master System's
That's a
follow-up, so they
thick
brought out this
controller.
3-buttoned hunk. Anybody else ever realize just how big the Sega Genesis controller really
That
is?
thing's
Like,
massive.
whoa. This guy has some meat on its bones, but weirdly enough, it only has the same amount of buttons as the NES controller. Like, it doesn't have a
But
select
what's going on
button,
with the
so
rest of the
even though it
space?
has 3 face buttons, they both have 4 in total. That led
Hmm.
to problems down the line when fighting games were coming over, which required more buttons, so Sega crammed some more in with the introduction of the 6-button controllers. Shove your hand between the couch
Oh,
cushions and
God.
you'll find various Sega Genesis controllers, each different from the last. Like, Sega released so many Genesis controller
Why?
variants, it's crazy.
Why?
They're all different in terms of design, button placement,
That's so many.
D-pads. It's ridiculous.
That's a mouse. That's a mouse. Emergency report.
I interrupt your regularly scheduled me with an emergency report by me.
Oh,
Controllers made
wow.
by other companies, not the console manufacturers themselves,
Do
are
that
running
count?
rampant, and
Oh.
most are up to no good.
What is that one with
This is the third-party
sliders?
controller watch list. Our mission statement is to bring more awareness to shit. Here we have the
Yeah,
TAC 50
are there
joystick
any,
for your
like,
local Sega
third-party
Genesis
ones that aren't
system.
good?
It falls in line with the rest of the, I guess if that's what you want sort of thing, controllers.
Well, I guess
It's
Scuff
not bad,
counts
but
as
it
third
doesn't
party,
necessarily
don't
work
they?
well with the vast majority of the Sega Genesis library. It does have these suction cups on its base, which makes it harder to move around on a coffee table, and it also looks pretty good on a windshield. The 6-button controllers are fine and good, but the 3-button one
You
is
know
the
your mind
classic,
went there,
one my
too.
mind immediately shoots to when Genesis is on the mind, and it's a solid controller in its own right. It may be a bit bulky, but it feels good. However, it was completely outdone by the makers of Chibi Robo Ziplash. The SNES
What did you just
controller
say?
is magnificent. It may not be my favorite of all time,
It looks good. I like the blues they use. The grays. Gray's my favorite color.
In this beautiful way where it's so comfortable to use your thumb to press the Y button with the rest of it resting on B, ready to use at a moment's notice.
Yeah, they did their homework on that one.
Mario World or Mega Man X. Shoulder buttons.
Never played a Mario game outside of Mario Kart.
All buttons in the D-pad feeling exquisite. Couple that with the rounded shape, and this is something that dreams are made of. Weirdly enough, with the release of the Super Nintendo Classic Edition in 2017,
Nintendo I was born then.
released a new version of the controller with a less glossy, rougher type of plastic for the controller shell. And I gotta say, I actually prefer the new release. It just feels a bit better in my opinion.
Well, a lot newer.
Atari, just go home. The Atari Jaguar brought back the classic number pad.
Still not bored yet.
I'm sure they looked at Sega combating Nintendo by adding more buttons to their controller and shrieked, "Yep, that's the next big craze. More than 12
more buttons.
The kids
Everything."
will love us." Next up, the original PlayStation came to be due to a failed partnership between Sony and Nintendo, which would focus on a CD add-on for the SNES. After that bust, Sony created their own console based on their knowledge from working with Nintendo, which is pretty obvious looking at the controller. I sometimes forget how similar the PlayStation and SNES
The DualShock's older than me?
Fundamentally, the only main differences are the D-pad, 2 sets of shoulder buttons, and thighs. That's it. However, the PlayStation controller finally became a man with the DualShock. Look at the size of these things. This redesign features Meteor triggers.
I'm as old as the DualShock. Oh!
The rumble and analog were obviously responses to the Nintendo 64's controller, which came before it, and we'll get to that in due time.
When did the DualShock come out? It might actually be older than me.
Sticks a standard. It also introduced clicking down
it's probably
on
holiday
sticks
time.
as an additional button input, which, can I say something here? R1, L1, R2,
yeah.
L2. These are shoulder buttons. It makes sense they're numbered like this. Why are these called R3 and L3? Anyways, I love
because they're the inputs.
Sticks. They're so smooth.
August
the works
27,
so well.
1997. I was born July
isn't doing anything
1997.
For you. And you hate happiness. Here's the Nintendo 64 controller.
That's a weird one. How are you supposed to hold it? How many hands do I have?
This came out after the original PlayStation controller and before the DualShock, and
I haven't
we can
used
bark
that
about
one.
this controller all we want, but gotta admit, this thing was innovative in so many ways. Controlling a game in 3D with the analog control stick, camera control, 4-player multiplayer being standard on the console,
Smash?
even the trigger on the back, give your finger a cock and
It's
bam!
so weird.
This was a huge leap forward for the industry, yes, but answer me this. Just what the hell is this thing?
How many hands do I
Prongs
have?
Make it so you have multiple ways to play multiple games. Maybe
It's
you
smart.
can hold it like this, or this.
You can do anything.
Or even this. But that means
and
not all
trash.
the buttons are readily available to the player in any of the controller holding styles.
Well,
Also,
maybe the game
stick
doesn't
is
need 'em.
Garbage. This thing is just a skinny, plastic, uncomfortable piece of work that wears out too easily. Now, the Nintendo 64 controller did a lot right. It introduced Rumble with the Rumble Pack accessory. The analog stick brought us games like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. And look at these colors. This thing is a color Scott Wozniak's worst nightmare.
I think I had the green
like
one.
This controller. Moving on, the
And then my
Sega
cousin
Saturn
broke it.
controller was pretty decent. Basically just an evolution of the Genesis 6-button ones with shoulder buttons this time around. But Sega also
not as
introduced
thick.
the 3D control pad for a few games,
That's a
specifically Nights into Dreams.
CD player.
And this controller leads us into its immediate successor on Sega's last home console, the Sega Dreamcast controller. Yep, I don't like this controller.
No, I don't
Is
think
this
anyone-
controller as
ooh.
bad as the Nintendo 64's? God, no. It
Why
actually
can't
has
you
a layout
look
that makes
through
sense. Well, this stick is just not comfortable. This was still when many companies
Big.
didn't realize that hard plastic on an analog stick isn't mankind's favorite thing out there.
No.
Also, why does the wire come out of the bottom?
Why is this
There's a
thick?
grip for you to pop the cord in near the top, so that way it's pointing in the right direction.
What does that
Which
matter?
just kind of comes off as a slight fix to a design oversight. At least the
Well,
triggers were analog, which was a solid innovation. It definitely made racing games more realistic. But who
Okay.
could forget the VMU, the memory card with a screen displaying info.
Oh,
with
that's why you
its own
can
games
see
to be
through it.
played. But that, PlayStation's back, baby,
DualShock.
with the PlayStation 2's all-new DualShock 2.
What's the difference?
This is the same controller, except the
Oh.
face buttons are now analog, which is dumb. Why do you need the triangle button to be pressure sensitive? Why? It felt like they just assumed analog inputs were the next big thing, but you don't need it for everything. Well,
True.
Moving past
Xbox,
that, we have the
the
introduction
first-
of the
it's
Xbox
so
brand.
big.
With it, holy sh**.
The Duke.
All I can tell
Is
you,
that the
first
Duke?
off, that was the easiest Easter egg hunt I've ever been a part of. This controller does get a number of things right. Number one,
It's so-
giant f***ing Xbox logo. The Duke, as it's referred to now,
That is the Duke.
is a behemoth.
I
It's big for the sake
grew
of
up
being
playing
big.
Xbox.
There's no reason for
I
it to be this way.
don't have a
Now, it's
PlayStation.
completely
Ever had one.
usable, but it's just not that great when you get down to it. Like, what is this?
Yeah, no.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Also, the
I was
dual
always
sticks
melted.
Just feel weird. Like, the left one has a large concave area, and the right one has a much smaller area, which honestly feels like it's convex. God, I need a shower. Microsoft designed a smaller controller for the Japanese market that made its way over to the States later down the line, and this is much more reasonable.
Yeah.
I can actually get behind
And
this
then
one.
that
It
eventually
just
turns
feels much
into the
better.
360
Everything
controller.
actually makes sense this time. After Nintendo wouldn't stop laughing for 5 years straight, they really cleaned up their act with the GameCube controller.
Ah,
This
yes,
thing
I have
is
GameCube.
Pure comfort. It just feels right
Yeah.
in the hands. The button layout is definitely different compared to every other controller.
It
and while
always
I
screwed
prefer
me
the more
up
traditional
playing the
design,
GameCube because, like,
this
the
layout
button,
makes a lot of
what
sense.
buttons where.
The main face button you'd probably use in most games is A. So why not have
But
everything
X is
orbit around it?
on the right side.
triggers are crazy satisfying to click down, and the left stick is leagues better than the Nintendo 64 one. I love this controller, but while it's one of my favorites, it does have some gross parts. The D-pad and C-stick were made for ants, and the lack of another shoulder button is a bit odd. Regardless, the
Yeah.
GameCube controller has definitely stood the test of time.
After going from the Xbox
These
controller
pesky
to that,
wires, man, what is this, the year 2000? That's where the Wavebird comes in, a wireless
So,
variant of the
huh?
controller.
Oh.
It uses radio frequency to transmit a wireless
What?
signal.
What's that little
Wireless controllers
scroll
were
on
around
bottom?
for a while, but most used IR, like a TV remote. You had to keep them pointed to the adapter for them to function properly. But all you had to do with the Wavebird was match up the dials on the controller and the adapter, and you're all set.
Oh,
While
that's
it wasn't
cool.
the first wireless controller, I'd argue it's the first truly great one. You can go all around the room with it, and it works perfectly. The only main downside compared to going wired is that it doesn't include rumble and it takes batteries. Was the
Yeah.
GameCube C-stick not small enough for you? Well, do
Is that
I
the
have a
GameStop?
bad controller for you? Introducing the GameStop branded wireless GameCube
GameStop
controller.
made
Too
controllers?
small and uncomfortable for any of you with hands out there. The analog stick keeps with the tried and true tradition of hard plastic to make sure you hate it even more, and the
Yeah.
buttons reek of loud plastic cheap. Also, it's been reported that if you do touch a
That's
controller
small.
like this, you will most definitely contract bed bugs. Damn it. Wireless was
Oh,
truly the next
there's
step for
the 360
controllers. We make our way
controller.
to the Xbox 360, which has one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time. I mean, there was nowhere to go but up after this thing, but
Yeah, true.
everything is just so finely
Yeah.
tuned and makes for a perfectly balanced
honestly,
controller.
is it better than the one
Minus
controller?
the D-pad. Microsoft later released 360 controllers with this transforming D-pad where you can have it like a traditional one or go back to this garbage. Personally, I have no clue why you'd want anything other than the more traditional D-pad, but I don't care. This thing is fun to twiddle with. Next up, the PS3 control. Jesus Christ.
It's the same
It's been
thing.
over 10 years at this point, and
It's
you
the same
still
thing.
haven't moved on. To be fair, Sony was set to go with an all-new design for the PS3 standard controller.
Oh,
I've never been so happy to see this design come back. The
Yeah,
6-axis
no.
controller was there for the first few years of the PlayStation 3's life and was basically the DualShock again, but now wireless with motion control capabilities and no rumble. Sony later
No
released
rumble.
a traditional DualShock 3, rumble and motion controls included. Now everything was
Huh.
going pretty smoothly with controllers.
I have
at
a
this
custom
point.
360
The
controller,
360 really
actually.
hit it out of the park. The PS3 was going with a time-tested design, and Nintendo.
the Wii
Yeah,
remote.
the PS3 controller may have had some motion controls, but the Wii Remote Fallout embraced them.
And the-
there are definitely things I
the,
love
what,
and
nunchuck?
hate about this controller. When it works, it really works. When it doesn't work,
Dude,
it really
I
doesn't.
loved playing
We
Wii
only have a
Sports.
D-pad on the remote with a few buttons on the
Yeah,
front. and
I
a
thought it
trigger
was
on the
great.
back.
I loved it.
It may seem limiting, but the controller was smartly designed to be usable in a multitude of ways, like a TV remote. On
It
its
probably
side, like
helps
an
with
old-school
hand-eye
NES
coordination.
controller with the nunchuck attachment that actually gives you a stick, or inside a countless supply of plastic shit. I really
Yeah, I didn't
admire
really
how
like
creative
those.
they got with uses for the Wii Remote, but I'm not gonna lie and say this thing is a great controller. The sideways control method
That was always
isn't
weird.
my favorite. I'm just
I
not
didn't
a
like-
huge
it
fan
didn't
of this
feel
D-pad
comfortable.
or these buttons. And like I said, the motion controls are definitely hit and miss. However, Nintendo did release the Wii Motion Plus add-on and the Wii Remote Plus
What did that
to enhance
do?
the motion capabilities, and I gotta say with
I
these,
thought it was solely
I'd
to
say
protect
the Wii
it.
Remote is pretty alright.
I didn't know it
Motion is
did
pretty
that.
accurate now, and when used properly, it can be a really fun controller.
They don't
But if
still
you're
make
more
Wiis
into the
anymore, do they?
Traditional side of things, might I suggest the Wii Classic controllers?
As
They
he
plug
plays
into
the
bottom
Wii
just
Shop
like
music in the
nunchuck and-
background.
Man, I forgot how decent these things really were. The original is quite derivative of a Super Nintendo controller, but includes some modern additions like two sticks that are way too close together, and buttons I like
Yeah.
to refer to as, you call these triggers?
Are
There's
they
also this mystery
designed
button on
for,
the top,
like,
which, correct me
people
if
with
I'm
small
wrong,
hands?
but I don't think this was ever used, and still don't know what use it was ever going to have.
Maybe it's
The
supposed to
original
be,
Classic
like,
controller
a
was
strap?
great for retro games, but a bit lackluster
Maybe?
for more modern ones. So let's flip that around. Here's the Classic Controller Pro.
Ooh.
It's much more akin to the PlayStation
I like the
2
gold. I don't like the
controller, and
font,
it's great
though.
for some of the more hardcore Wii games out there.
Why is the
Nintendo
B
then put the
lowercase?
Wii Remote in Photoshop, gave it a little of this, a little of that,
Mhm.
popped a screen in the middle, and blam. Wii U gamepad. It gets a bad rap. It's huge, unnecessary.
2012 is when the
Listen,
Wii
I'm
U
with
came
you on
out?
A lot of that, however, I found this controller
felt like
to
it
be
was just a couple years ago.
wildly comfortable to use. The grips are nice, and all the buttons and sticks are large.
I
and
really
feel great.
used a
The problem
handheld.
is, this guy. The screen isn't the worst, but certainly not the best. And its use in some games was just annoying, and it led to one of the worst battery lives out there. The gamepad doesn't hold a charge well at all, so if you charge it up and don't use it for a week, chances are when you pick it back up, it's gonna be dead-zo. Also, you have to charge it via a separate power adapter, not the Wii U itself. And just so much garbage was thrown into this thing. I'm pretty sure you could survive in the wilderness for a week with just this. A camera, NFC, TV remote.
Why is it NFC?
Almost none of that is needed. Except I will say the TV remote was pretty useful. Like with the Wii remote, if you're not into all of this, Nintendo offered a Pro Controller, and get ready, Wii U Pro Controller Defense Force.
Is it good?
I don't like this controller.
Why?
It all has to do with the fact that the buttons are on the bottom. It's just so annoying and stupid. This format worked on
They're
the
like,
gamepad
let's make it
because
the
was so
opposite of a
big.
DualShock.
Buttons were placed in a perfectly usable location.
They're like, we can't copy
It just doesn't
Xbox.
work for me. Also, the triggers feel weird, man. I think it's because they aren't analog, yet they're designed just like the 360s, which are. The Wii U gamepads were these fat patios for you to click, and they felt good. These
fat
not so
patios.
much. At least this
Hopefully these
controller
videos
lasts up
don't
to
have
80 hours on a
copyright
single
issues.
charge, which is something the gamepad definitely can't say. However, both got on my bad side for having this gross glossy finish. Like, this looks good in pictures, and for 2 seconds after you open the package.
It's already dirty.
Afterwards, welcome to Fingerprint Avenue.
Yep.
Now I don't own this thing anymore due to unforeseen circumstances.
Why?
If I could sue a game controller, I would first go after whatever the
Game
hell this
go
third-party
too
Wii U
far.
controller is, and then sue the Wii Remote for deception.
Why?
But I do remember everything about it and how it was the definition of everything a falsely advertised product was. This controller was trying to scam people into thinking it was a Wii U Pro controller. However, it turns out it was fundamentally just a Wii Remote and Wii Classic controller all in one. Now, the
Why
idea
is
of
it
having
supposed to be a
standard
plus
controller with
plus
the capabilities
everything?
of a Wii Remote and Classic controller all in one is great. The problem was this controller was terrible at everything it did. The build quality was cheapo. The buttons felt like mashed potatoes. The only reason why anybody gave this controller any attention was the fact that there was a Super Nintendo and Super Famicom color scheme available.
Oh.
The PS4 controller actually switched some things up
And
compared
does
to
that
the
have a
PlayStation
touchpad?
controllers of the past.
2013.
They went for a new, more ergonomic design, and I think it worked out pretty well. There's this touch bar now, which I personally haven't found all too useful. A light bar, which just feels like an excuse for this controller to have shitty battery life, and... Whoa, 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 where did the start and select buttons go? Yeah, the PS4 was the start of something dreadful. The death of start and select. Instead, we got this share button, which is useful enough, I guess,
options?
sharing photos and videos of gameplay.
That's dumb.
What the hell is
You've
this
never
options
used
garbage? Well, whatever. I do have to say that while the DualShock 4 is comfortable and a decent controller overall, there are a few problems with the build quality. I don't know, it's just the one controller I consistently have problems with, and I'm not alone with that. The Xbox One controller feels a bit like more of the same from the 360 controller,
Is it
but with
always
random
that
tweaks
thick?
and changes that feel both better and worse.
What?
Like, it feels
It
more
feels
premium
thick.
in some cases,
Well, this is
but
also the
cheaper in
second one with
others.
the
It's a bit more
recess.
compact,
I
bright
definitely
look,
prefer
more modern than the 360s.
this one.
I think the D-pad is better and the sticks have a more grippy surface to them. But I don't know, there's something
these
a bit
have little
off about this
pads on
design.
them.
Not bad by any means.
This one doesn't.
But I think I still prefer the 360s. Also, am I the only one that thinks the replacements for Start and Select make no sense?
No, it makes no
hell
sense.
Is 2 boxes and 3 lines.
But they kept them in the
That finally
same
brings us
spot.
to the Nintendo Switch's supply of controllers, the Joy-Con, the controllers that come
What-
packed in with
and
the
the
console.
drift.
The Switch is an interesting situation.
The stick
It had
drift,
to have
which
controllers
apparently
that have
really
to be in
bad.
the console itself to enable handheld play, but be detachable to make use of a variety of different play styles. God, these things are too small. Listen, I adore so much about the Joy-Con, but they're basically taking everything in modern controllers and cramming them into something you'd find in a dollhouse. I mean, these things have a lot going on in them. A full suite of buttons and sticks, new HD rumble, motion controls, NFC. They're perfectly usable, just not that great. I love the idea of
What
how
was
they were
that
designed
supposed
to
to
be
show?
used as two
Ice in
separate
the cup?
controllers. But is
Oh,
this
that
a
has little
real
bumpers?
live? The shoulder buttons for the
What?
individual Joy-Con are miserable, so much so that Nintendo supplies straps to slide on for better ones. Using them
Nice.
together is alright, however, they're still more akin to the Nintendo 3DS controls compared to most home console controllers. For me
they're
personally,
small.
I go for the Switch Pro controller. This thing is truly
I didn't even know that
nonsense. It gets
existed.
right to the point. It uses a button and stick layout that makes me swoon. The texture of it all
It looks
feels
like an
great.
Xbox.
Nice big meaty buttons, a solid battery life, all
It's
the
like a
technology
bloated
from the
Xbox
Joy-Con.
controller.
This is what you call a controller. I always keep the Joy-Con attached to the Switch for when I want to play portably, and keep the Pro Controller on standby for home
That makes
console
sense.
use.
Yeah.
And that is a basic history and review of most
Wait
of
a
the
minute.
major video game controllers. We've gone through a lot, and while not
This is
all of
5
it's
years
been
ago.
great, it's all led to where we are now. The
I guess
inception of motion controls.
the Xbox
pause
One was the
button,
newest
the
one back
introduction of
then?
analog
Yeah.
control with the 1292 Advanced Programmable Video System.
Jesus.
Experience with number pads, trackballs, screens, these successes and failures helped us form some of the greatest game controllers out there. Don't immediately bat away new features and
Yeah, so
gimmicks introduced
PS5
to
and
controllers,
Series
because
X
they may be
was-
huge steps in the right
they weren't out
direction for
yet.
the industry. They may not be talked about as much as the games or consoles themselves.
What is your favorite controller
but
out of
they
all
are
of them?
some of the most important aspects of the video game industry.
Well, let me know what your favorite or least favorite game controllers are, and if you'd excuse me,
This is very
I
informative.
have another, for real this time, meeting about video game related issues. This time on video game box art. You gotta be fucking kidding me.
The box art, okay. Launch titles, that's gonna be a little bit interesting. Viral games, Scott the Waz. He has a lot of content. It's a lot of video game related stuff. I do have a gaming channel. I do stream 4 times a week. I should be playing Genshin Impact. Should be my 3rd stream ever playing Genshin Impact, because apparently Dragon Ball FighterZ rollback beta is PC only, which makes me really sad inside. But I'll be streaming that at 5 p.m. tomorrow. I'll be taking on Resident Evil 4. I'm taking on the final boss like almost immediately. That'll be at 5 p.m. as well. But we're getting a lot of new content starting this week, and it's just going to be so much fun as we're pushing on towards 100,000 subscribers. Hopefully we can do some more Scott the Waz in the future, and I look forward to reading your comments, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. But until next video, take care and cue the music.